Now, for entirely administrative reasons, I thought over lunchtime it might be expedient just to adjust the order of events this afternoon. And in reaching that view, what I'm going to do is invite Miss O'Neill, who would otherwise have spoken tomorrow morning, to come to the lectern and address you on behalf of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh.
I'm grateful, sir. This opening statement is made on behalf of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. The inquiry already has the written statement submitted in advance of today's hearing, and I adopt that written statement without reading it verbatim, sir. The statement contains a degree...
Sorry, Miss O'Neill, I'm going to ask you just to pause. We've got a few coming back from the break. Just start again.
Sir, this opening statement is made on behalf of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, and the inquiry already has my written statement. That written statement, sir, includes some contextual material to give a bit of background to the Royal College, which dates from 1505 and was formally established by Royal Charter in 1851. The Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh is one of 4 independent Royal Colleges of Surgeons in the United Kingdom and Ireland. It collaborates with, but is separate from, the Royal College of Surgeons of England, the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, and the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. It is a charity registered with the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator. The college, notwithstanding being the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, is a global network of more than 34,000 professionals comprising fellows, members, associates and affiliates. The majority are surgeons, but the college also contains sizable faculties of dental surgeons and of pre-hospital care professionals, including paramedics and emergency care practitioners. Membership includes people at every stage of their career, from medical students through to trainees, consultants and those who have retired from practice. I want to say a little sir, about the Royal College's interest in and participation in the inquiry's work. A key objective of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh is the promotion of high standards of clinical competence and conduct among surgical professionals. In pursuing that objective, the Royal College is an integral part of the healthcare system within the UK and internationally. It promotes high standards in a variety of ways, including through providing education and training to surgeons throughout their careers and by setting and assessing postgraduate surgical examinations. It offers surgical and dental courses for surgeons at all stages of their careers in relation to clinical and other aspects of their practice. The college has 5 vice presidents, each with a specific portfolio of responsibilities. One of those portfolios is to oversee the college's work on clinical standards and quality assurance. The college has, for some years, had a professional standards committee to oversee standards issues, but this has been recently disbanded as part of wider governance changes within the college. A quality assurance committee is in the process of being set up to replace that former professional standards committee and to support the work of the Vice President in this area. In addition, the Royal College has a patient safety group whose role is to ensure that the Royal College's core professional standards, training and educational activities are focused on continuously improving patient safety and reducing harm. The PSG is a multidisciplinary group whose membership is drawn from all faculties of the college and includes representatives from both the wider surgical team and patients with lived experience. It's engaged in a wide range of activities in support of patient safety, including providing members and fellows with expertise and advice on patient safety issues, promoting good practice, and coordinating training and increasing awareness of clinical human factors to improve the safety of surgical care. The group also works with medical educators, NHS bodies, and other royal colleges. It is engaged in work to improve the surgical workplace environment by supporting surgical teams and helping to address conflict within those teams. It also provides resources to support surgical teams when adverse outcomes or errors happen in surgery. The Royal College of Surgeons therefore has a particular interest in paragraph 6 of the inquiry's terms of reference, which concern the role of any other bodies which played or could have played a role in the care provided by Mr Eljamel to his former NHS patients. It is keen to understand whether and to what extent there were deficiencies in regulation across the healthcare system that caused or contributed to patient harm. In relation to providing assistance to the inquiry, and in making this opening statement, the Royal College has had regard to the guidance for core participants that was issued in advance. There are a number of matters in respect of which the Chair invited submissions that the Royal College does not address because of the very limited direct engagement that the Royal College had with Mr Eljamel and his patients. By way of explanation, while Mr Eljamel was a surgical fellow of the Royal College between 2003 and 2015 and acted as an examiner in certain examinations during that time, the Royal College did not receive, to the knowledge of the current management team, any complaints about Mr Eljamel's practice while he was a fellow. The Royal College does not regulate surgeons' licences or fitness to practice in the way that statutory regulators such as the General Medical Council do. While the Royal College has a code of conduct and disciplinary scheme for members, Mr Eljamel was not subject to any disciplinary action by the Royal College, and the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh was not involved in the clinical review that was carried out by the Royal College of Surgeons of England, and was not made aware of the findings of that review other than by way of media reporting. At this stage of the inquiry's work, the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh does not have access to detailed information about Mr Eljamel's clinical failings or the response of his employers, colleagues and regulators to those failings. The Royal College is keen to listen to and to understand the evidence that will be given to the inquiry about the failings in Mr Eljamel's practice and the response of the wider medical community to those failings. The Royal College does carry out invited reviews of surgical services and of individual surgeons' practice, and supports Scottish health boards in conducting what are known as Annex B and C reviews. It has also recently agreed to provide Healthcare Improvement Scotland with access to experts to help them assess concerns about service provision raised with them. The Royal College therefore wants to learn from the work of the inquiry with a view to providing better support to the NHS in respect of these areas of work. You have, sir, though, invited core participants to indicate where they think that they can contribute to the work of the inquiry and where they might be of most assistance to the inquiry. The Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh can assist the inquiry in providing its perspective on matters of good professional and clinical practice. In particular, it can provide evidence on what constitutes good practice in the training and supervision of junior staff, by reference to paragraph 2 of the terms of reference, and the duty of candour by reference to paragraph 7 of the terms of reference. The Royal College has already sought to assist the inquiry by reviewing and commenting on the draft expert letter of instruction in relation to the clinical review. More generally, the Royal College can provide evidence about its role in setting and maintaining high standards of surgical practice. The Royal College will seek to assist the inquiry in any other ways the inquiry considers appropriate. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, let's return to the agenda, and I will now formally invite Ms Doherty to address the hearing on behalf of NHS Tayside. Mr Doherty, when you're ready.
Sir, my name is Una Doherty. I appear today on behalf of NHS Tayside along with Kat McQueen and instructed by Tracy Turnbull of the Central Legal Office. NHS Tayside welcomes this inquiry which has been established to investigate the professional practice of Mr Eljamel, a consultant neurosurgeon who was working in NHS Tayside between 1995 and 2014, and the adequacy of governance systems that were in place to protect his NHS patients. NHS Tayside recognises the importance of this inquiry for many patients of Mr Eljamel and their families. It understands that the inquiry will be a difficult time for many people. NHS Tayside wishes to extend its sincerest apologies to all patients who have suffered because of the treatment they received from Mr Eljamel. Many patients of Mr Eljamel have experienced injury and distress and have been left with an enduring distrust of healthcare professionals and the NHS. At a time when many patients were faced with frightening diagnoses and had the reasonable belief and trust in NHS Tayside to keep them safe, they were let down. NHS Tayside is very sorry for the events that happened and fully acknowledges that, in many cases, the situation was exacerbated by the way in which it managed patients' complaints and concerns. NHS Tayside knows that it failed to react appropriately and at an adequate pace when there were concerns raised about Mr Eljamel's clinical practice. Again, in this regard, it let down its patients. NHS Tayside understands that patient trust and confidence has been eroded because of the actions of Mr Eljamel and its own failures to ensure its systems of oversight and supervision of Mr Eljamel were adequate. NHS Tayside regards it as fundamentally important that its patients have confidence in the quality of care and treatment that they receive. It has made many changes in the intervening years since Mr Eljamel worked in NHS Tayside to strengthen clinical and professional governance. Changes have been made to systems and processes to ensure that NHS Tayside is alerted at an early stage when there are escalating concerns relating to clinical practice. It has also ensured that there are many ways in which people can speak up about any concerns they have, and that when complaints and concerns are raised, they are managed in a consistent and timely way with openness and transparency. All of these changes have been made with the intent of avoiding a similar situation occurring. NHS Tayside recognises that openness and transparency is fundamental in order to rebuild the trust of patients and the wider public. NHS Tayside very much views this inquiry as an opportunity for an independent assessment of what went wrong and why. It recognises that it is accountable for its failures and does not shrink from that. It welcomes recommendations from this inquiry as to further changes which should be made. The inquiry's conclusions will be of great importance to NHS as the safety, well-being and trust of patients is at the heart of its work. As a learning organisation, it wants to hear from patients and families, those best placed to advise and share their experiences, as to how it can consistently improve and build confidence in the services it delivers. Today, we have listened carefully to the opening statement made on behalf of the patient group, including the powerful patient experiences described. NHS Tayside welcomes the opportunity for the serious matters raised by the patient group in relation to NHS Tayside to be investigated in this inquiry. NHS Tayside is fully committed to assisting the inquiry and will work collaboratively with the inquiry team. It welcomes the inquiry's trauma-informed approach and is keen to ensure that this is adhered to. It recognises its systems and processes are a significant focus of the inquiry's investigations. It will closely review relevant materials and will listen carefully to the evidence to understand the perspectives of those directly affected, all with an openness and a willingness to get things right for its patients. This opening statement is in 7 chapters addressing the following areas: the role of NHS Tayside as a health board, NHS Tayside's due diligence review 2023, its findings, recommendations and actions, support to those directly impacted by the inquiry, assistance to the independent clinical review, data protection breaches, preliminary comments on the inquiry's approach, and time bar for civil claims by patients of Mr Eljamel. Dealing with the first chapter, I'd like to explain briefly the role of NHS Tayside as a health board. Tayside Health Board, commonly known as NHS Tayside, is one of 14 territorial health boards in Scotland and was established in 1974. Health services in Tayside have operated under different legal and governance arrangements from the period 1974 to date. A health board is a public body constituted by the Secretary of State. Each health board is responsible for its respective region. NHS Tayside is responsible for health services in Angus, Dundee City and Perth and Kinross. It provides health services to those in its geographical area and may also do so for patients from other health board areas. NHS Tayside is required under legislation to fulfil certain duties and functions. It plans, commissions and delivers NHS services to its local population. This involves the delivery of frontline NHS services, including primary care, secondary care and tertiary care in hospitals within its geographical area. Like other health boards, NHS Tayside is funded by and reports directly to the Scottish Government. It is accountable to the Scottish ministers, who in turn are accountable to the Scottish Parliament. The second chapter I address is NHS Tayside's Due Diligence Review 2023. Since 2013, multiple internal and external reviews have been undertaken in relation to Mr Eljamel's practice. These identified and addressed systemic issues within NHS Tayside. The reviews highlighted important points for NHS Tayside to address relating to professional governance, creating a culture for staff and patients to speak up about safety concerns, and the importance of clinical effectiveness. As the inquiry will consider the reviews undertaken under Terms of Reference 12, in the written opening statement, quite a lot has been said about the most recent review, which was this NHS Tayside Due Diligence Review of documentation held relating to Professor Eljamel, dated 25th August 2023. I don't repeat just now all that is set out in the written opening statement about this review. Instead, I summarise by explaining that this review was instructed in 2023 to try to get a better understanding of what had happened, what had gone wrong in NHS Tayside's systems and processes, and what actions were needed to strengthen the systems and processes. The review was undertaken by a team led by the Associate Medical Director of Clinical Governance. The findings of the review included conclusions as to past events and considered the clinical and professional governance arrangements in place in 2023. A non-exhaustive summary of the findings includes: first, that Mr Eljamel was not open and honest with patients and colleagues. While such behaviours are rare within the medical profession, there is a need to have systems in place to detect and act on these if they occur. And since Mr Eljamel practiced in Tayside, NHS Tayside has overhauled the governance and alert systems in place for professional governance. Second, while there were multiple ways in which signs of poor practice could appear, the way in which those signs were considered collectively was lacking, and feedback from trainees was not always seen by line managers. Since Mr Eljamel practiced in NHS Tayside, the joining up of potential alerts is achieved now through an executive director-led safety oversight group which responds to emerging potential issues. Third, it was found that there was variability in the organisational response to signs of poor practice within the system. Some complaints did not lead to formal investigation using governance processes, and there was a variation in response times. Once multiple signs of poor practice were considered together, decision-making related to Mr Eljamel's practice was delegated too far down the organisation in 2013. Restrictions placed on Mr Eljamel's practice in 2013 were not adequate, and decision-making was not sufficiently well documented. The level of supervision decided upon was not proportionate to the concerns being raised at the time, and once implemented, were not monitored effectively. During the period of Mr Eljamel's employment, there was an absence of an advanced process of professional governance, from concerns being raised to their being acted upon, and in ensuring clear documentation of decisions made. Now, however, there is a process in place through the establishment of the Responsible Officer Advisory Group. Fourth, there was a finding that reliable documentation of actions arising from recommendations from previous reviews from 2013 to 2022 was not consistently present, and monitoring and assurance routes for those actions were variable. However, now revised systems have greatly improved the opportunities to connect signs of poor practice and adopt whole system learning from events. Fifth, it was found that the communication with patients affected by Mr Eljamel's practice was of variable quality, fragmented and generally poor. There had been no central coordination to ensure a truly person-centred approach. When concerns were raised by patients, the issue was managed through a small subset of the acute management team. There was a lack of visibility within NHS Tayside, no governance routes to assure and scrutinise, and no indications or reporting of improvement through action plans. Since the establishment of the Patient Liaison Response Team in early 2023, patients with long-running concerns have a single point of contact to build improved relationships and understanding of concerns to achieve a more consistent and person-centred approach. At the conclusion of the review, NHS Tayside's Executive Medical Director made 9 recommendations in relation to professional governance, clinical governance and corporate governance, which were presented to NHS Tayside. NHS Tayside fully accepted the review's recommendations and developed an action plan to address them. In actioning the recommendations arising from the review, NHS Tayside has sought to achieve improvements in patient safety and the quality of patient care. It considers that its systems are now better placed to respond to any future clinical concerns and potential harm to patients from the practices of individual clinicians. The aim is that the positive changes which have been made will reduce the risk of and prevent events such as those being considered in this inquiry arising in future. While the systems and processes now in place are very different to those which existed at the time of Mr Eljamel's employment at Tayside, NHS Tayside recognises that there will always be more to learn. It is keen to learn lessons from this inquiry to enable it to do what more it can to ensure the safety of its patients. I turn now to my third chapter, which is support to those directly impacted by the inquiry. In relation to support to former patients of Mr Eljamel, NHS Tayside wishes to offer its support to those directly impacted by the inquiry. On the 3rd of October this year, the Executive Medical Director of NHS Tayside, Dr James Cotton, sent a letter to the ICR setting out the support options offered to former patients participating in the ICR. Patients are being offered the opportunity of independent, confidential and trauma-informed psychological support and care. Patients participating in the ICR will self-refer to this service via the ICR website. NHS Tayside is making the same offer to all former patients of Mr Eljamel, regardless of their participation in the ICR, and this can be accessed through the Patient Liaison Response Team. Counsel to the inquiry had indicated in his note that the ICR had secured agreement in principle for psychological support services for applicants to the ICR organised via the Association of Clinical Psychologists UK, which was to be funded by the Scottish Government. But as set out in the written opening statement, this is not NHS Tayside's understanding of the position, and rather, as I've already said, NHS Tayside has offered these independent psychological support services for ICR applicants. Counsel to the inquiry this morning has confirmed that it is, in fact, as NHS Tayside had understood, that it is funding the independent psychological support by the Association of Clinical Psychologists, not the Scottish Government. And support to current and former employees of NHS Tayside. In advance of the preliminary hearing on the 10th of September, Counsel to the Inquiry asked NHS Tayside to confirm its position in relation to the provision of representation and support to its current and former employees in connection to the inquiry. NHS Tayside's position was set out in written submissions dated 4th September 2025 and have been clarified in its submissions dated 13th November 2025. NHS Tayside wishes to reinforce that it is keen to fully support all of its current and former employees throughout the inquiry. There is, however, an important distinction between representation and support. NHS Tayside's legal team are not the legal representatives of any individual in this inquiry. They are instructed by and represent the public body NHS Tayside. In terms of the inquiry rules, they are the recognised legal representatives of NHS Tayside, not any individual. This does not mean that NHS Tayside will not provide support to current and former employees of NHS Tayside. Its intention has always been to provide as much support to individual employees as is considered acceptable by the inquiry. Steps have already been taken by NHS Tayside to provide a range of pastoral and practical support to its current and former employees, as set out in its written submissions dated 4th September 2025. In those submissions, NHS Tayside sought guidance from the inquiry in relation to the nature of legal support which it ought to offer its current and former employees. This guidance was sought because NHS Tayside fully appreciated the distrust felt by some of the former patients of Mr Eljamel towards it. Considering this, the concern was that issue may be taken with NHS Tayside and its legal team being too closely involved in the provision of written and oral evidence by its current or former employees. NHS Tayside does not want to cause any further trauma or distress to the patient group. It is also important that current or former employees of NHS Tayside feel able to provide their best evidence. Those individuals may not feel comfortable with NHS Tayside's legal team being involved in the provision of their evidence to the inquiry. NHS Tayside also considers that it would not be appropriate for its legal team to have any involvement in the preparation of an individual current or former employee's evidence in circumstances where the individual's position diverges from that of NHS Tayside. It is anticipated that a conflict of interest will not likely occur in most cases, but such a situation could nevertheless arise. At the preliminary hearing, oral submissions by both counsel to the inquiry and counsel for the patient group indicated that the expectation is for NHS Tayside to provide legal support to individual current and former employees in connection with the preparation of their evidence. NHS Tayside is grateful for this confirmation and has set out in its submissions dated 13th November 2025 a proposed approach to the provision of legal support for current and former employees in connection with their evidence to the inquiry. Counsel to the inquiry has indicated that the proposed arrangements are broadly acceptable. He did seek some further clarification, which was provided, as he confirmed in his opening address this morning. Today he has sought some further clarification, and we will come back to the inquiry with the clarification sought. It is hoped that the suggested approach will be acceptable to both the inquiry and the core participants. Turning now to the fourth chapter, which is assistance to the ICR, the Independent Clinical Review. NHS Tayside wishes to offer its assistance and support to the work of the ICR. It has previously provided assistance to the ICR by contacting those patients who had advised NHS Tayside's PLRT that they would like to be engaged with the ICR. This communication was to advise them of the online public engagement session to be held by Professor Wigmore of the ICR on the 26th of February 2025. NHS Tayside's intention in assisting in this way was simply to allow the ICR to make progress with its important work. The ICR also sought assistance from NHS Tayside to write out to the whole Eljamel patient cohort to advise of its work. As the inquiry had not yet been formally set up when this assistance was sought, the ICR had no means of compelling NHS Tayside to provide the required information. NHS Tayside was the only organisation with access to the necessary information of patient names and addresses. To help the ICR progress its investigations without unnecessary delay, NHS Tayside therefore wrote out to the Eljamel patient cohort as requested. My fifth chapter is data protection breaches. Regrettably, there have been some data breach incidents. These have been dealt with by NHS Tayside and reported appropriately to the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the regulatory body for data protection. NHS Tayside also sent letters to the individuals affected to inform them of this error relating to their personal data, explaining what had happened and to offer its sincerest apologies. NHS Tayside would like to sincerely apologise again to those affected. It recognises that these incidents may have compounded patients' distress and further eroded confidence in NHS Tayside. Following the data breaches, the Chief Executive commissioned a learning review. This sought to evaluate the systems and processes in place in relation to information governance, identify improvements required to data security across NHS Tayside, and make recommendations for organisation-wide learning. The learning review has identified areas for improvement relating to organisational data protection awareness and its consistent application in practice, and the requirement to strengthen information governance structures. An improvement plan will now be developed and will report for security and assurance to NHS Tayside's Clinical Governance Committee. Turning now to my sixth chapter, which is preliminary comments on the inquiry's approach. Counsel to the inquiry has produced a very detailed and comprehensive list of issues. NHS Tayside is grateful to have been afforded the opportunity to input into this document. It welcomes the close assessment by the inquiry of the matters contained within the list of issues and considers that all the listed issues are important and merit detailed attention in the inquiry's investigations. There are a number of comments which NHS Tayside makes in an attempt to assist the inquiry at this stage. First, the scope of Mr Eljamel's practice within the NHS in Scotland. NHS Tayside supports a broad and thorough investigation by the inquiry into Mr Eljamel's practice within the NHS in Scotland. Neurosurgery within NHS Tayside was originally established as a purpose-built unit in Dundee Royal Infirmary in 1966. Whilst Ninewells Hospital officially opened in 1974, neurosurgery services remained at Dundee Royal Infirmary until its closure in 1998. Mr Eljamel will therefore have worked at Dundee Royal Infirmary for a period. The inquiry may therefore wish to investigate Mr Eljamel's practice at Dundee Royal Infirmary. As far as NHS Tayside is aware, Mr Eljamel did not practice in any other health board in Scotland. It is noted that counsel for the patient group raises the point that some patients of Mr Eljamel were from the NHS Fife area. As NHS Fife does not have its own neurosurgery unit, patients from that health board area may be referred to NHS Tayside for neurosurgery treatment. It is not uncommon for patients from other health boards to receive treatment within NHS Tayside. NHS Tayside considers that any NHS patients treated by Mr Eljamel during his employment with NHS Tayside should come within the scope of the inquiry. It is noted that if another health board is identified as being of relevance to the inquiry's investigations, this may require that board to become a core participant in the inquiry, which could result in some delay to proceedings. Next, Mr Eljamel's involvement in research projects. NHS Tayside recognises that Mr Eljamel held concurrently a research position with the University of Dundee alongside his patient practice at NHS Tayside. it is understood that given his academic position, research projects were a component of Mr Eljamel's workload. As such, this area will likely be of interest to the inquiry. NHS Tayside does not have access to information about Mr Eljamel's research. Accordingly, this area did not form part of NHS Tayside's internal investigations in relation to Mr Eljamel's practice. NHS Tayside therefore welcomes the inquiry's investigation in this area as part of term of reference to subsection E. I now turn to complaints or concerns regarding Mr Eljamel's practice prior to 2012. NHS Tayside's knowledge regarding any complaints made prior to 2012 is limited. This is because its complaint systems were changed in 2012 and the information contained electronically on its old systems was not retained. Notwithstanding the limited information available to it, NHS Tayside would welcome investigation by the inquiry into any complaints or concerns raised about Mr Eljamel's practice prior to 2012 in terms of reference 4 and 5, some of which will no doubt be informed by the work of the ICR. Previous investigations and reviews relating to Mr Eljamel's practice within NHS Tayside. NHS Tayside recognises that there are some very detailed questions in the list of issues about how the investigations listed under terms of reference 12 were conducted and the outcomes. The due diligence review, which I have already mentioned, was conducted because of the recognition that previous investigations and reports into Mr Eljamel's practice did not sufficiently address the full range of issues. It is acknowledged by NHS Tayside that there was previously a lack of oversight around the timing and nature of reviews and the actions taken to address review findings. As I've already explained, the focus of the due diligence review was to assess the governance position with recommendations and actions. That review looked at the systems in place and improvements that could be made going forward, rather than individual actions by former employees. NHS Tayside therefore considers that the inquiry's investigation into previous reviews would benefit from detailed consideration of the rationale behind individual decision-making within NHS Tayside at the relevant time, which was out with the scope of the due diligence review, as this may give rise to further learning points. Possession of documents relevant to the inquiry. NHS Tayside holds many documents which will likely be of assistance to the inquiry and is working hard to respond to any requests for evidence it receives from the inquiry. Given the passage of time, however, some documents have been destroyed in accordance with the contemporaneous NHS Tayside's Health Records Strategy and Management Policy, its Health Records Operational Guidance and Service Operating Procedures, and Scottish Government guidance. These indicate a minimum number of years for which documents ought to be retained, after which they're eligible for destruction. Some documents were therefore destroyed long before the setting up of this inquiry. More recently, however, and as the inquiry has been advised, NHS Tayside has discovered that a number of hard copy theatre logbooks, some of which would have contained information relating to Mr Eljamel's surgeries during the period 1995 to 2013, were unfortunately destroyed on around 24th of January 2025. It is estimated that there were probably around 40 of these logbooks which dated from the 1960s onwards. NHS Tayside understands that some logbooks may have contained information of potential assistance to the inquiry's investigations. It also recognises that the destruction occurred following a formal do not destroy notice for information that may be relevant to the work of the inquiry issued on behalf of the Chair on the 11th of October 2024. As soon as the incident became apparent, the matter was escalated immediately within NHS Tayside. An internal investigation has taken place. It has been ascertained that the theatre logbooks were destroyed by members of the department in which they were held. the individuals involved were not aware of the connection between the theatre logbooks and Mr Eljamel. The destruction was carried out in accordance with the NHS and Scottish Government guidance policies already mentioned. The destroyed theatre logbooks related to surgeries undertaken by Mr Eljamel and by other members of staff. Given the importance of this matter, it has been raised at a senior level within NHS Tayside. Renewed instructions have been communicated to staff in relation to identification, logging and retention of documentation relevant to Mr Eljamel to try to ensure that there is no further destruction of documents in error. NHS Tayside has ascertained that much of the information normally contained within the destroyed logbooks should be contained in patient records if those still exist. It is hoped that much of the information will still be available to the inquiry, albeit in a different format. NHS Tayside deeply regrets this error and is committed to ensuring that it does not happen again. Next, I turn to identification of witnesses to the inquiry. NHS Tayside previously provided the inquiry with a list of individuals it employed in management roles at the relevant time. It is considered that these individuals may be able to assist the inquiry with the provision of written and or oral evidence. NHS Tayside does not, however, have witness statements from any individual. Mr Eljamel worked in various wards and clinics for a period of almost 20 years. NHS Tayside is providing to the inquiry medical records sought by Section 21 notice, which contain information about clinical personnel involved in patient care. This information may be of assistance to the inquiry's identification of individuals whose evidence may be relevant to its investigations. NHS Tayside offers to further assist the inquiry as far as it's able to do so. Expert evidence. NHS Tayside is grateful to the inquiry for allowing it the opportunity to review and input into the draft ICR letter of instruction to expert neurosurgeon, and for counsel to the inquiry's confirmation that it will be given the same opportunity in respect of further experts instructed by the inquiry. And we are grateful for the confirmation given today by counsel to the inquiry that the identity of the inquiry experts will be disclosed to court participants. In relation to the ICR's expert neurosurgeons, we do consider that it would be useful to know the identity of these experts in advance of seeing their reports. And finally, in this section, the Rule 8 request to NHS Tayside. A Rule 8 request for evidence relevant to Section 1 of the evidential hearings was received by NHS Tayside on 6th November with a response deadline of 4th December 2025, so 4 weeks later. The request seeks a draft corporate witness statement and disclosure of documents. The information sought is extensive and covers many areas of the inquiry's terms of reference. Although many people within NHS Tayside are working on the response, the challenge of the short timescale has been increased by the planned annual leave and sickness absence of some individuals. NHS Tayside has already sought an extension of the response deadline of 4th December and is grateful that the inquiry is considering this. Turning now to the final chapter, time bar for civil claims by patients of Mr Eljamel. Under Section 17 of the Prescription and Limitation Scotland Act 1973, a claim for damages for personal injuries must be brought within 3 years, often described as time bar, unless the court exercises its discretion in terms of Section 19A to allow an action to proceed out with that time frame. NHS Tayside is aware of a view reported in the press that patients of Mr Eljamel ought to be exempt from the 3-year limitation period. In claims for damages for personal injuries by former patients of Mr Eljamel raised out with the 3-year limitation period, NHS Tayside has committed to actively reviewing the facts and circumstances on a case-by-case basis when considering whether to plead that the claim is time-barred. NHS Tayside believes this approach accords with the expectation of the Scottish Government, as stated by the First Minister on 2nd October 2025 at First Minister's Questions. So, in conclusion, NHS Tayside remains sincerely sorry for the distress experienced by patients of Mr Eljamel. It is acknowledged that NHS Tayside failed to put in place sufficient measures to safeguard patients once concerns were raised about Mr Eljamel, and this placed the safety and well-being of patients at risk. NHS Tayside recognises that in many cases it has added to the distress and trauma experienced by patients in the way it has handled ongoing complaints and concerns. It is also sincerely sorry for this. As I've already said, the due diligence review in 2023 found that NHS Tayside's communication with Mr Eljamel's former patients was poor. This was not appropriate nor acceptable. NHS Tayside understands that all of these factors have undermined the trust and confidence of patients, families and staff, and has been working hard to rebuild that trust. It has sought to understand and learn lessons from the events surrounding Mr Eljamel. It has taken seriously and acted upon the findings and recommendations arising from internal and external reviews. The clinical and professional governance processes within which NHS Tayside's teams operate today are demonstrably different to those which were in place more than a decade ago. Positive changes have been made to systems and processes within the organisation to seek to safeguard against the possibility of any such incidents arising again in future. Nonetheless, it is recognised that there is always room for further learning and improvement. NHS Tayside is keen to continue to learn lessons for the future. It is hoped that any recommendations arising from this inquiry will lead to further organisational improvement, which will positively impact on the quality of patient care. NHS Tayside wishes all the former patients of Mr Eljamel and their families to know that it is entering this inquiry with openness and transparency at the forefront of its participation. NHS Tayside will contribute openly to this inquiry. It will be accountable for the decision-making and actions taken while Mr Eljamel was working in NHS Tayside, and for its handling of complaints and investigations thereafter. As a learning organisation, NHS Tayside is committed to improving services. It wishes to take whatever steps are necessary to ensure that its systems and processes are the best that they can be to provide safe, effective and patient-centred care for the population of Tayside. Thank you, sir.
Well, what I propose to do now is to invite one further statement this afternoon, and that will be given by Ms Thompson on behalf of the Scottish Ministers. Those who have an agenda will be aware, and if not, I will tell you anyway, that will leave for tomorrow's hearing oral opening statements on behalf of NHS Education for Scotland and Healthcare Improvement Scotland. There will also be a submission on behalf of the Independent Clinical Review. And after all of that has been done, I will invite Mr Dawson to respond as he sees appropriate to the matters that have been raised during the course of the statements today. So that is, I hope, a steer as to what happens next. We will be starting again tomorrow at 10:30. I mention that now just in case I forget to tell you when we reach the conclusion of today's proceedings. But with that in mind, may I invite Ms Thompson to address the hearing on behalf of the Scottish Ministers. Ms Thompson.
Thank you, sir. My name is Laura Thompson. I represent the Scottish Ministers, assisted by David Blair and instructed by Harper MacLeod. I'm grateful to Council to the Inquiry for making clear that I represent the Scottish Ministers in their capacity as core participants and that I do not represent the sponsored team. At the outset, the Scottish Ministers wish to thank you, sir, for affording them core participant status. The Scottish Ministers welcome the opportunity to participate in this inquiry and to assist the inquiry in its work. The Scottish Ministers recognise that legitimate questions and concerns exist regarding their responsibility to secure the effective provision of national health services in Scotland, and in particular oversight of NHS Tayside and the handling of complaints about Mr Eljamel. They welcome both the scrutiny and the opportunity for learning that this inquiry will bring. The Scottish Ministers wish to assure the inquiry of their commitment to learning lessons and to taking positive steps to improve the experience of all who receive treatment and care within the NHS. Patient safety is the Minister's priority. The Scottish Ministers offer their sincere sympathy to all patients who have suffered at the hands of Mr Eljamel and wish to repeat the sentiments expressed by the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care in his speech to Parliament on the 29th of February 2024, where he recorded his regret and sorrow that the search for answers by patients and their families had taken so long. The Scottish Ministers are therefore pleased that this inquiry and also the clinical review intend to adopt a patient-centred and trauma-informed approach to their investigations. The Scottish Ministers are grateful for the guidance issued by the inquiry on the 29th of October in respect of matters that could most usefully be addressed in opening statements. Having regard to that guidance, I propose to address the following matters. I'll begin by providing an outline of the remit and responsibilities of the Scottish Ministers in relation to the NHS. I'll then provide a brief chronology of the Scottish Ministers' principal involvement in respect of the complaints made against Mr Eljamel. I will then address you, sir, in relation to the terms of reference of particular relevance to the role of the Scottish Ministers and in respect of which they are likely to be well placed to assist the inquiry in its work. And finally, I'll make certain observations in respect of matters arising from paragraph 13 of the guidance note. The remit and responsibilities of the Scottish Ministers. The Scottish Ministers are established as the devolved Government of Scotland in terms of Section 44 of the Scotland Act 1998. Health, and in particular the operation and administration of the National Health Service in Scotland, are matters devolved to the Scottish Ministers. In terms of Section 1 of the National Health Service Scotland Act 1978, the Scottish Ministers are subject to a statutory duty to promote in Scotland a comprehensive and integrated health service designed to secure A, the improvement in the physical and mental health of the people of Scotland, and B, the prevention, diagnosis and treatment of illness, and for that purpose to provide or secure the effective provision of services. Section 1A imposes an obligation on the Scottish Ministers to promote the improvement of the physical and mental health of the people of Scotland. Whilst the 1978 Act provides for the establishment of individual geographical and thematic health boards for the delivery of health services to patients across Scotland, the Scottish Ministers retain ultimate responsibility for the NHS in Scotland. The Scottish Minister with portfolio responsibility for the NHS in Scotland is the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care. During the period since it appears concerns were first reported by NHS Tayside to the Scottish ministers regarding the practice of Mr Eljamel in December of 2013, there have been 6 Cabinet Secretaries. The Scottish ministers hold ultimate responsibility for the 14 territorial and 7 special health boards that collectively form NHS Scotland. Their responsibility is discharged through the Scottish Government's Health and Social Care Directorates. Directors General are responsible for families of directorates within the Scottish Government. The Director General, Health and Social Care, is also the Chief Executive of NHS Scotland and has overall responsibility for the work of the Health and Social Care Directorates, with directors and senior clinical advisors, such as the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Nursing Officer, taking responsibility for particular directorates. The Director General delegates, through a scheme of delegation, financial responsibility for particular budgets and expenditure incurred against these budgets to individual directors. The Health and Social Care Directorates that sit within the portfolio of the Director General and contribute to the delivery of policy for health and social care, as well as the administration of the NHS in Scotland, include the Directorate of the Chief Medical Officer, the Directorate of the Chief Nursing Officer, the Directorate of the Chief Operating Officer, NHS Scotland, the Directorate for Health and Social Care Finance, the Directorate for Health Workforce, the Directorate for Mental Health, the Directorate for Primary Care, the Directorate for Population Health, and the Directorate for Social Care and National Care Service. The Scottish Cabinet is the Scottish Minister's main decision-making body. It comprises the First Minister and all Cabinet Secretaries, all of whom are bound by the Scottish Ministerial Code and the Doctrine of Collective Responsibility. The primary role of the Health and Social Care Directorates in relation to Cabinet is to provide advice to the Cabinet Secretary and to draft and advise on papers going to Cabinet in the Cabinet Secretary's name. The Scottish Government's Health and Social Care Management Board is the main decision-making body of the Health and Social Care Directorates. The board is accountable for the strategy and performance of the NHS and Health and Social Care Directorates, ensuring that resources are best used to respond to the priorities set by ministers and deliver the best services possible for the people of Scotland. The Permanent Secretary holds the Director General to account, with the board being used as the vehicle by which the Director General discharges their functions. The Scottish ministers are also assisted in relation to matters of medical policy and clinical standards by the Chief Medical Officer. There have been 4 office holders during the relevant period. A brief chronology of the Scottish Minister's involvement. On the 7th of September 2023, the then Cabinet Secretary, Michael Matheson MSP, announced an independent clinical review into the clinical care provided to Mr Eljamel's patients and that a public inquiry would be held in respect of the actions of Mr Eljamel and the previous steps taken to investigate his conduct and clinical governance issues arising. The Scottish ministers anticipate that detailed chronologies setting out the Scottish ministers' and Scottish Government officials' engagement with the issues under investigation by the inquiry will be of assistance to the inquiry. They will be pleased to provide detailed chronologies and associated documentation under the inquiry's direction in due course. What follows is but a high-level chronology of the Scottish Government's involvement. On the 19th of December 2013, the Scottish Government received formal notification from NHS Tayside that it had suspended Mr Eljamel from practice following concerns raised by 55 separate patients. This followed a report provided by the Royal College of Surgeons to NHS Tayside consequent to its invited review in September 2013. On the 24th of April 2014, the Scottish Government was informed that Mr Eljamel had indicated his intention to retire at the end of May. He also resigned as a member of the General Medical Council at the end of May 2014. Between 2014 and 2017, the Scottish Government received substantial correspondence from a former patient of Mr Eljamel, setting out concerns he had raised with NHS Tayside regarding the treatment and care he had received. On the 1st of December 2016, the then Chief Medical Officer, Dr Catherine Calderwood, met with the GMC to discuss the frustrations felt by former patients that Mr Eljamel had been able to voluntarily remove himself from the register prior to the conclusion of a fitness to practice investigation. On the 1st of September 2018, the then Cabinet Secretary, Jean Freeman MSP, wrote to all NHS health boards in Scotland seeking confirmation from each health board as to the steps they were taking as a matter of clinical governance to properly handle complaints regarding clinicians. On the 1st of November 2018, the then Cabinet Secretary wrote to health boards setting out the requirement to share good practice to ensure that boards learn from each other, and an event was being set up to facilitate and progress this. On the 4th of December 2018, a meeting was held, attended by senior representatives of the territorial health boards and facilitated by Professor Craig White, then Divisional Clinical Lead, Directorate of Healthcare Quality and Improvement, and now Associate Director of the Directorate, to share good practice and take forward work on what would become the Openness and Learning Commission. The Directorate of Healthcare Quality and Improvement now sits within the Directorate of the Chief Operating Officer, NHS Scotland. On the 18th of December 2020, the then Cabinet Secretary met with 2 former patients of Mr Eljamel to discuss their concerns regarding the treatment and care provided by him, together with NHS Tayside's response to those concerns. On the 11th of March 2021, the Cabinet Secretary commissioned a review of unresolved and outstanding concerns regarding Mr Eljamel to be led by Professor Craig White. Clinical reviews of the treatment and care provided by the 2 patients I have referred to were also commissioned. On the 10th of May 2022, the report on the review of unresolved and outstanding concerns was published. It made a series of recommendations to NHS Tayside, including in respect of complaint handling and measuring the effectiveness of actions taken following previous reviews. Certain recommendations were also made to NHS Scotland in respect of developing national guidelines for consultant supervision and the National Neurosurgical Audit Programme. On the 9th of February 2023, the then Cabinet Secretary, Hamza Yousaf MSP, met with a number of MSPs to discuss their constituents' concerns regarding prior investigations into the actions of Mr Eljamel and the calls which had been made for a public inquiry. On the 20th of April 2023, the then Cabinet Secretary, Malcolm Matheson MSCP, directed that an independent commission, led by an independent legal expert, be established to review 1. Individual cases in which patients considered they had suffered at the hands of Mr Eljamel, and 2. Learning systems and governance within NHS Tayside. On the 31st of August 2023, NHS Tayside published its due diligence review report, identifying various failings in NHS Tayside's handling of the concerns regarding Mr Eljamel. On the 7th of September 2023, and in light of the findings in the due diligence review report, the Scottish Government announced the establishment of this public inquiry and the independent clinical review, replacements for the previously planned independent commission. Turning to the inquiry's terms of reference, sir, the guidance issued to core participants invited them to identify those aspects of the inquiry's terms of reference and list of issues, as updated, that are of particular importance to them or that they consider merit particular or particularly detailed attention on the part of the inquiry. It is anticipated that the Scottish ministers can best assist the inquiry in relation to issues arising in respect of the adequacy of the reviews and investigations carried out since Mr Eljamel's suspension in 2013. Whilst the ministers are committed to assisting the inquiry in any way they can, they are not currently aware of any information available to them relating to concerns regarding Mr Eljamel until they were advised of his suspension on the 19th of December 2013. In particular, the Scottish ministers consider that the terms of reference upon which they are most likely to be able to assist the inquiry are term of reference 6, to investigate the role of any other bodies which played or could have played a role in the care provided by Mr Eljamel to his former NHS patients, including but not limited to the Scottish Executive or Scottish Government relating to its overall responsibility for the NHS in Scotland, and term of reference 12, which includes an examination of all previous reviews or investigations undertaken by or on behalf or on the instructions of the Scottish Executive or Scottish Government into the professional activities of Mr Eljamel during the course of his employment with NHS Tayside, and to consider the adequacy and timeliness of those reviews or investigations, including the adequacy of steps taken in light of the findings and recommendations of them. A non-exhaustive list of investigations is then provided, and this includes the Scottish Government's review of unresolved and outstanding concerns regarding Mr Eljamel, former consultant neurosurgeon at NHS Tayside in 2022. Having regard to the list of issues, the Scottish ministers have a particular interest in respect of issues 234 to 239 and 255 to 261, which relate to term of reference 6, and 299 to 327, which relate to term of reference 12. They also have an interest in issue 75, which asks whether Mr Eljamel held an advisory role with the Scottish Government, issue 266, which relates to NHS Tayside reporting obligations to the Scottish Government, and issue 228, which references reports made by NHS Tayside to the Scottish Government. In due course, it is anticipated that the inquiry's attention in respect of the Scottish ministers might reasonably be directed at two broad questions. First, could or should the Scottish ministers have identified issues in respect of Mr Eljamel prior to notification of his suspension being received on the 19th of December 2013? And second, whether the Scottish ministers' response to the issues once raised was adequate and timely. Moving on to matters arising from the guidance note of the 29th of October, sir. That note invited core participants' comments and observations on a variety of matters. In their written submission, the ministers offer their views on the scope of the terms of reference and explain that they do not at this time wish to suggest further lines of investigation or propose additional issues for consideration by the inquiry, or suggest possible recommendations, but that they will keep these matters under review. In my oral submission today, I wish to restrict myself to saying a few words in relation to documents, witnesses, and areas where the ministers might best assist the inquiry. Dealing firstly with witnesses, paragraph 13D of the guidance note invites suggestions as to the identity of witnesses whom core participants submit the inquiry should take written statements or perhaps hear oral evidence from, and to identify the role which such individuals are expected to be able to play and the areas which and why their involvement in those ways would be beneficial to the inquiry's fulfilment of its terms of reference. Having regard to the matters on which the inquiry might best be assisted by the Scottish ministers, it is anticipated that the inquiry may wish to hear evidence from the following witnesses. Firstly, the various Cabinet Secretaries in office during the relevant period, who might speak to the dialogue between NHS Tayside and the Scottish Government, dialogue with other key stakeholders, including former patients, the decision to initiate the review of unresolved and outstanding concerns, the decision to convene the independent clinical review, and, of course, the decision to announce this public inquiry. Then, the various chief medical officers in office during the relevant period to speak to engagement with stakeholders regarding the clinical care provided by Mr. Eljamel. The inquiry may wish to hear from Professor Craig White, Associate Director of the Scottish Government's Healthcare Quality and Improvement Directorate, to speak to his role in relation to the review of unresolved and outstanding concerns. The inquiry may also wish to receive evidence from the two consultant neurosurgeons to speak to the case note review of the care of two patients that was associated with the review of unresolved and outstanding concerns. Next, the various Directors General of Health and Social Care during the relevant period to speak to the corporate knowledge and responsibilities of the Scottish Ministers during the various periods subject to inquiry. And finally, the various Chief Operating Officers of the Health and Social Care Directorates during the relevant period to speak to the corporate knowledge and responsibilities of the Scottish Ministers during the various periods subject to inquiry. It may be, sir, that as the inquiry's investigations progress, additional former or current Scottish Government officials will be able to assist the inquiry with the provision of corporate statements or individual witness evidence on particular points of interest. The Scottish Ministers will work collaboratively with the inquiry to ensure that it has access to the most relevant witnesses to assist it in its important work. Turning to consider paragraph 13F of the guidance note, which references key material which core participant groups hold. The Scottish Ministers hold substantial documentation, particularly in relation to the commissioning of the review of unresolved concerns, the independent clinical review, and this public inquiry. The Scottish Ministers respectfully agree with the proposals set out within the note by Council to the inquiry of the 10th of September 2025, that disclosure should be made by reference to appropriate Rule 8 requests and, where necessary, Section 21 notices, that Rule 8 requests be issued on an iterative basis focusing on specific topics or issues. The Scottish Ministers respectfully request that as much notice as possible is given in respect of any Rule 8 request. Steps have already been taken to ingather documentation that it is anticipated the inquiry will wish to consider, and in response to the Rule 8 notice intimated on the 10th of November. However, given the large volumes of data held by the Scottish Ministers and the nature of the platforms on which such information is stored, full review and disclosure will inevitably take some time. Paragraph 13G of the guidance note invites comment on those aspects of the inquiry's terms of reference and list of issues and sectional evidence plan to which core participant groups think they can contribute to the greatest extent. The Scottish Ministers anticipate their principal contributions to the inquiry being in respect of terms of reference 6 and 12. In that context, the Scottish Ministers' main involvement is likely to arise in respect of the following sections of the inquiry. Section 1, setting the scene. In particular, the Scottish Ministers can provide evidence setting out the roles and responsibilities of the Ministers, the Cabinet Secretary, the Chief Medical Officer, NHS Scotland, and the Directorates for Health and Social Care, as well as the formal mechanisms in place for sharing of information between those various parts of government. They can also provide an overview of their involvement in the various reviews that fall within the remit of Term of Reference 12. Section 5, Corporate Clinical Oversight, Complaints, the role of the Scottish Ministers, investigations and organisational candour. In particular, the Scottish Ministers can provide detailed evidence in respect of their role and responsibilities and the investigations undertaken by or on behalf of the Scottish Ministers during the period from December 2013 onwards. Section 6. Lessons to be learned. The Scottish Ministers anticipate that, as regards their role, there may be lessons to be learned in respect of, firstly, oversight of health boards by central government and whether the level of oversight provided is adequate or requires to be increased. Secondly, the extent and effectiveness of information sharing between relevant agencies. Thirdly, whether the steps taken by the Scottish Ministers as matters were reported to them were adequate. Fourthly, whether a public inquiry should have been convened earlier. Fifthly, the extent to which recommendations of previous reviews have been implemented. And sixthly, the extent to which such recommendations might protect against any repeat of the issues that gave rise to this public inquiry. In conclusion, sir, the Scottish Ministers are grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the inquiry's work by making this opening statement. They reiterate their willingness to work collaboratively with the inquiry and to assist the inquiry in fulfilling its terms of reference. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, just before you sit down, I wanted to just clarify one matter, and that was whether you had any observations in relation to paragraph 13b or 13c of the guidance that was issued. It's a matter entirely for you, but I wanted to be clear whether these featured as any part of your submissions.
They did, sir. I read them short, but if I may elaborate, paragraph 13, 13b. Sorry, sir.
13b2.
B2, I'm sorry.
13b7, 13b10, 13b11, and 13c. Now, it may well be that that was intended to be covered in brief, and I'm happy if you're content that you've covered them. I just wanted to be clear that they were dealt with here.
I'm obliged for that opportunity, sir. I chose to read them short. Paragraphs 13b2 and 13b, I think it was 3, both related to the scope of the terms of reference. Yep. Sir, you have the brief comments that were offered by the ministers in our written submission. In short, in relation to whether the remit should extend beyond Mr. Eljamel's practice at Ninewells Hospital into other parts of the NHS, the Minister's position is that it's ultimately a matter for you, sir, to interpret the terms of reference, but the Ministers would query whether work carried out by Mr. Eljamel for NHS Fife would fall within the current terms of reference, as NHS Fife are not referenced within the inquiry's terms of reference and are not a core participant to the inquiry. But notwithstanding that observation, it does not seem to be problematic for the inquiry to consider the extent to which the workload within NHS Tayside was perhaps increased as a consequence of Mr. Eljamel taking on work from other parts of the NHS. The other paragraph that touched on terms of reference was, I'm sorry, it wasn't B3, it was B7, is in relation to whether the inquiry should investigate complaints or concerns about Mr. Eljamel's practice prior to 2012 and the nature of any such complaints or concerns. And the Minister's position is quite simply that the terms of reference are sufficiently broad to allow consideration of those issues. The other subparagraphs to which you drew my attention, sir, were all matters in respect of which the Minister's position was ultimately, we have no suggestions to make at this time in relation to further investigations, additional issues for the lists of issues or draft recommendations. However, we will keep those matters under review, and no doubt it goes without saying, sir, that in the event that the Ministers wish to contribute in any way to shaping the scope of the lines of investigation, the list of issues or draft recommendations, then they won't hesitate to bring any thoughts or observations or suggestions that they have to make to the attention of your team, sir.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as I indicated before Ms Thompson addressed the hearing room this afternoon, I don't intend to take any further statements this afternoon. We'll resume again at 10:30 tomorrow morning and deal with the matters that I mentioned some moments ago. Can I thank you all for attending today, whatever your interest is in the inquiry. As I say, we will start again with Mr Dundas addressing you on behalf of Health Improvement Scotland and NHS Education for Scotland in the morning, after which there will be a final address from Mr Dawson for you to consider. Let me, meantime, wish you all a safe journey home, and for those who are coming tomorrow, we will meet again tomorrow, but thank you, and I wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you.